You're listening to the New Story podcast from New Story Church in Kansas City. To learn more about New Story Church, visit our website at www.newstory.church.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Equip podcast, where we're equipping you to live out your Christian life as you faithfully love God and love others with truth and grace. My name's Jeremy. I am one of the pastors at New Story Church, and glad that you chose to join us today for this episode. But I am not alone. I am joined, as ever, by one of our other pastors.
Hi, Jeremy. Hi, everybody else.
Who are you?
My name is Pierce.
Yeah, if people don't know your voice yet. But it's not like this podcast has giant reach and they're like, oh my gosh, who are these guys on this podcast? Likely you know. We're glad that you're here today. We got some stuff we're going to get into. We got a couple, as always, kind of culture thing that we're just going to kind of discuss a little bit, and we'll get into a little bit more follow-up from this weekend's teaching as we finished up our series on the way of Jesus. But first, you know what's coming, Pierce.
Dang it. I saw it on the outline.
He hates these. Oh, yeah, I did have it on the outline. Dang it. I did. I like to hide it from you, but I don't have the riddle on the outline, though, so you have no idea what that is. So, are you ready for it?
Sure.
So far, you are 0 for 2.
I'm 0 for 2.
Mm-hmm. We did get an email from someone answering what the riddle was before finding out what it was. So, they're better than you. So, why don't you prove all the people wrong who say you can't do it, Pierce?
I can do it.
Okay, we'll see.
Probably not.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, here it is. And if you know and you're listening, we would love for you to send us an email at info@newstorychurch and let us know what the answer is before you hear the answer, you cheater. Okay, you ready?
Sure.
There are 30 cows in a field.
30 cows.
And 28 chickens.
28 chickens.
How many didn't?
Do what? Wait, what? There's 30
There's
cows?
30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many didn't?
There's 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens.
Cue the Jeopardy music.
Would it be 28 chickens? Because they're not in a field?
No.
I felt very confident on that for a second.
No. Yep, keep that music going. As the editor, I'm going to put this music over the top, so we'll have a little background music for you.
Yeah, because you're just going to hear me like, okay. There's 30 cows in the field.
And 28 chickens.
28 chickens.
How many didn't?
Okay, let's do some math. 58. No one didn't.
No.
Okay. The farmer didn't.
No, there's no mention of a farmer.
Well, sometimes, I don't know, there's no mention of a sea. There's still a sea.
That's a callback to a previous one. There is a C in the alphabet, by the way. Go ahead.
Not an ocean, a body of water. Okay, so there's 30 cows in a field.
Right.
My father-in-law has cows, so Randy has 30 cows in a field. Mm-hmm. His neighbor has 28 chickens. How many didn't?
There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many didn't?
How many did not? How many did not? Well, the question I'm left with is like, well, how many did not do what?
Exactly.
And that's the riddle.
That's the riddle.
So how many did not?
I wonder if there's people listening in their car right now that are driving with rage and pounding their steering wheel because they know the answer.
No, they're going to be with me because they're going to be like, how many did not do what?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't know. You
can give up?
Yeah, we don't have to drag it on.
Okay, spoiler alert, everybody. Here you go. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many didn't? The key is you have to listen to what I say and not think of the words. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many didn't? Don't think of numbers. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens.
Dude, I have nothing. I'm listening.
How many cows ate chickens?
We have this mood lighting.
How
in
many
the podcast.
cows ate chickens?
Oh my gosh. 0.
So now that you know, there are 30 cows in the field and 28 chickens. How many didn't?
So 20 of the cows ate chickens. Well, how many chickens did they each eat? I'm assuming one.
Yeah.
So it'd be 8?
No. Don't, again, forget that number. Well, sorry people listening. He is just really, he'll get it here. There's 30 cows. 20 of them ate chickens. So how many didn't?
10.
There you go. There's the answer, ladies and gentlemen. There's your riddle. You know, we just like to get the juices flowing over here on the News Story Podcast, and helping people think and work with their brains.
Ugh.
And riddles are always riddles because it's not what it seems. So this has been Riddle Time with Jeremy, the Riddler. And now we're going to get into some other things. So sorry to put you on the spot. Actually, I'm not sorry at all. But
The Riddler, and you know we have this like warm light above us, and so we're like Batman right now. That's what
we're just. So does this make you Batman?
In this well, no, because justice. It did not happen. I did not get the answer right.
Okay. Well, there's no great transition out of nonsense into some serious conversation, but I think there's something important that I want us to get into here that you may have missed over the last couple weeks, or really toward the end of the month of February. Something you may have missed unless you're really in the world of the church and church leaders. But I think there's an important thing. It's a broader issue. Okay, you may know the name John MacArthur. John MacArthur is a prominent pastor at Grace Community Church in California. Has been a pastor there for many years. He's written a lot of books. He has a study Bible. There's a lot. Likely, if you are in evangelicalism or in an evangelical church, there has been influences from Johnny Mac, as he's called.
You probably read some kind of book, some kind of study, seen some kind of article.
Yep. Yeah, Johnny Mac's got a big influence, but he went kind of around with some comments that he made in February, and I just want to address some of those because there has been some things in recent years that have come out about him and his church that have not handled abuse situations correctly, have not handled things very well, and it was kind of around the same time that all the stuff came out about the SBC and all the cover-ups there, which we talked about on here. But some things came out at his church as well that were being covered up. But you can go look those up, John MacArthur at Grace Community, if you are interested in seeing what was happening there. But to jump back, Together for the Gospel is an organization that seeks to bring kind of evangelical churches together more than anything, or just churches together that are with focused on the gospel. And they had a MLK 50 celebration as a 50th anniversary since his death, and they just wanted to celebrate the life and legacy of Martin Luther King. And somebody asked about, they were having a Q&A at Grace Community Church. So jumping forward now, this was a couple years ago. It's like 2018 that happened. But the comments recently at John MacArthur's church, someone asked him, they're having a Q&A. They said, hey, how do you feel about like the Gospel Coalition, which is another one, like Together for the Gospel? How do you feel about these organizations? And his words, as they had a celebration, the Together for the Gospel had a celebration for R.C. Sproul, another author and theologian that you've probably benefited from in some way or another, whether you realize it or not. He said they had a celebration of that, and then the next year they had a celebration for MLK, and he found it a strange irony, quote, strange irony, to do this. Celebrate MLK. Why? Because MLK was, quote, not a Christian at all, and that his life, and quote, his life was immoral. He said, and this is again a direct quote: "You don't honor an unbeliever who misrepresented everything about Christ and the gospel." So to be clear, John MacArthur saying MLK was not even a Christian at all, and he misrepresented everything about Christ and the gospel. Now, likely, those would come to most people as a shock. That's a pretty big statement. What did you think when you heard that, Pierce?
Yeah, when I first read that, I saw that and I was like, that's a really fast judgment and statement. And, and you think about it because you learn about it in school, you learn about Martin Luther King, and you learn about that day as well. And you just kind of learn about his history. Of course, you learn from just like government class, or like, history class, you kind of learn about the details surrounding that. But, as I've gotten older and been in the church, you kind of learn about the more of the pastoring side of that. Because like when I was a kid, I just thought Martin Luther King was just a social activist guy, but it's actually a lot deeper than that. But my first gut reaction was that like the rash, quick judgment of to even go out too far to say like not a believer at all.
Yeah. That was, I think, most people's response, and that's why it went so broadly as it did. And there has been historically movements like John MacArthur. Or not, movements is way overstated, but groups of people that have tried to discredit MLK and what he did by undermining his theology primarily. But just a quick background on MLK before I just have some stuff for us to consider and think about in this, because again, this is a bigger thing than just some comments John MacArthur made. We're not going to sit here and just try to demean John MacArthur. That is not our purpose at all. But MLK, just a little background on him. He came from generations of Black Baptist pastors on his mom and dad's side. And he struggled as he was growing up, and really as he was kind of graduating high school, going into college, and some in college. He struggled with whether that faith he had been taught and given to him could really like adequately address the sufferings of his people. Because you got to think about when he grew up. When he grew up, 40s, 50s, like it was not a very different world then than we live in right now. And he was like, how can this theology that seems, I've seen white people have similar theology, how do these things work in congruence to adequately address the sufferings of our people? And so that would lead, I think, most people to kind of wrestle through what they believe. Now, Micah Edmondson is a MLK scholar, did his PhD work on some of MLK's theology. I would encourage you to go look him up, follow him, read some of his work. Great mind, but he's a guy that we, personally, I put a lot of trust in when it comes to evaluating his theology, because Micah also has known and knows many people that had close relationships with Dr. King. And that is usually a pretty good testament to a person and what they believe. But he wrote, Mike Edmondson, he wrote, King's early seminary papers don't reflect his final fully formed theology. And I would venture to say neither did mine. I went to a Bible college, and very early on in my Bible college, and even the stuff that I graduated speaking about, some of that's changed. Some of the theology's changed.
Yeah, and I almost wrote that down on our paper just to even talk about that, because I think our theology is like there's these tendencies, foundational things that we do not budge on. Like right. There's like salvation things we don't budge on, but a lot of like theology, a lot of different things is like you are continuing to learn more about Scripture, learn more about doctrine, more about these different beliefs and different things. And I think that's helping, because like you are ever changing when it comes to that. There's like Jesus Christ and Him crucified, no, but there's lots of other things that end up happening. It's not fully formed yet, because like when we were in Bible school, like we were like 18, 19, 20. That's
so far away from you. Oh, you're 28 now. I guess you're an old man. Welcome.
Yeah, I just
welcome to your oldies.
Yeah, I'm in my late 20s now. But like even where I was 3 years ago. Yeah. Just in like just the knowledge of scriptures and stuff, like it changes, and then like where we're gonna be at, hopefully, in 10 years. You know, like the idea is that you're constantly growing. So like to make rash decisions on Martin Luther King early in his ministry as opposed to late in his ministry, that's two different things.
I don't know what you guys had to do. I don't know what Bible college did you go to again?
Southwest Baptist University in Bolivar, Missouri.
Okay. I went to Faith Baptist Bible College in Iowa, and when we graduated through our systematic theology class, we had to do what are called orals, where we got a Bible with no notes in it, like no cross references, just a blank, straight up, boring Bible. I say boring, but you know what I mean, just like simple Bible. And they would reach into a hat, and we were in front of a panel of all of our classmates and a bunch of our professors from school, including our systematic theology professor and several others. And they would reach into a hat, and pull one of the 10 major doctrines out, then like ecclesiology, soteriology, eschatology, pneumatology, any of them.
Eniology.
And then they would proceed to grill you on it for a half hour.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
Prove this, explain this, like go. And so we had to do that twice. I got Christology and soteriology, and I did very well in those. I'm very, very happy I did that. But
yeah, those are a little, Christology.
And nobody wanted eschatology, which is study the end times if you're unfamiliar. Soteriology is salvation, like theology around salvation. Christology is, you can put that together, hopefully, study of Jesus and his deity and humanity. So that's something I had to do. Did you guys have to do that?
No.
Okay. But what I'm saying
was your actual
is,
degree? Mine was biblical studies.
Mine was associate pastor, youth and Greek emphasis.
Okay, so yours like a ministry degree.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so being able to stand up and give a defense for what you believe and why you believe it is
pretty common thing.
Yeah. So, but the reason I bring that up is for most people that's a horrifying situation. I really enjoyed it. I guess I'm weird on that front, but a lot of the things I studied and prepared for those 10 major doctrines, there's some things in there that have shifted. Now, the basis of what I believe about like who Jesus is, salvation, who God is, God's word, like all these different things, like those are solid. But there's some intricacies along that. Like, let's say when you look at ecclesiology, the study of the church or theology of the church, ecclesiology. One major shift in the last 2 years has been we believe that the role of deacon is open to men and women. And so that's something we institute here at church. If you go on our website, you'll see that we have 3 female deacons and 3 male deacons. That's a shift that I had that my Bible college would not have allowed.
No, my previous church either, like the one I was at. It is like I theologically lined up that way, and but it was just that dynamic, that theologically, and like you can disagree like that, and that's totally fine when it comes to like that kind of thing. We can have these conversations, we can talk about these things. But where I was, but the church I grew up in, no, like probably what I was taught, probably what I believed 10 years ago.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it would have been. But now, like as we studied it and looked through scripture and all these different things. Yeah. So
you get the point. My hope is that you listening, your theology is developing and you are growing and you are, to use a common term, deconstructing what is unhelpful and not right and reconstructing proper, good biblical theology in that place. And that's part of why we exist on this podcast, to help you do that.
And to build foundations.
Yes. So I say all that to say, to go back to Micah Edmondson's quote, King's early seminary papers don't reflect his final, fully formed theology, which is what most people are critical of. As he wrestled with liberal theology, such as like the social gospel, for example, he tested various ideas. By January 1956, in his famous Kitchen Vision, please go look this up, King made a decisive shift back toward the faith of his conservative Black Baptist upbringing, and that right there helps establish a little bit more of his theology that he would have had throughout his primary ministry years. So I say all that to say, Mike Edmondson, a scholar on King's theology, is affirming something very different than what John MacArthur would have. And Micah has a lot more sources and a lot more relationships to help inform that, and that makes a big, big difference. Now, some things to consider, why we're bringing this up. Things to consider. There was something you brought up to me ahead of time. I want you to, right off the bat, what were you, the thing that, when we heard this, you were like, dang, this is something that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, the quick decision to write them off as a believer, not a believer. Mm-hmm. That was the thing what we're talking about here, and but the power in words when it comes to especially from a platform like John MacArthur's platform. We're not here to bash him at all, but just the power that leaders have when it comes to how they speak about people. Yeah. And and that's even think about this, there's a reason why I don't like Q&As, because as you get to you're just put on the spot and you have to answer the question. That's what a Q&A is. And so that's happened to John MacArthur. And, he was asked a question and he answered it how he thought in the moment. Yeah. And probably not realizing all the backlash that was about to come.
And it was the certainty with his words as a very influential pastor, that people are coming to him with their questions. And I understand, like, listen, I know I can say some stuff on this podcast and no one's ever going to know because we're a small podcast.
Right.
It's very different than John MacArthur. And so there is a weight that comes with the platform that you have. As God grows your platform, there's a discernment and wisdom that comes with it. And I believe that John can be a very discerning man. We've seen that. A very wise man. But this seemed, not necessarily considering the power of his words. Now, I mean, obviously it's something he believes strongly, so he's going to speak about. But I think something to consider with this is the elephant in the room here is that almost by definition, conservative seminaries were segregated in the 40s and 50s. And any seminary at that point in time that chose not to be segregated and not be a part of that would have been labeled as liberal. And moved in kind of a theologically liberal direction as a result of being labeled as that and kind of ostracized.
And just like at the cultural situation at the time.
Yeah. No, there's no, and it sounds familiar to today. So we can get all upset about the decisions that he made, or maybe some directions that he went. But the fact is, the type of person who would fight segregation was not going to fit into a conservative seminary in the late 1940s. That's just a reality that we have to face. Why? Because the seminaries were either historically white or not accepting black students at all. And so that's a reality we have to face. That if we're going to be critical of his liberal theology, well, when he was in school, he wouldn't have been allowed in those schools when he was in college.
Yeah, and he's making a distinction. Like he's not a Christian at all. Is like, hey, like these people who are, at a liberal school, he can't be a believer because he doesn't believe this because of these other things, these outliers. Like these, like he took a couple of his stances, maybe these early stances or these social things, and he said he just made a broad swipe at these things and saying, well, clearly, since he believes that, he can't believe any of this other things. And that's like, I think the problem that like with this kind of thinking is that like we can quickly do that ourselves. Like we are guilty of this, like personally as well. Like it happens. Like we can make these quick judgments about people and then we just write them off in our minds.
We like it in churches. We can really easily fall into the trap of just wanting to make the decision on whether people are quote unquote saved or not. There's an important scripture that we read that says, man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. Pierce, I love you. I don't know your heart. I feel like I do. I feel like by all measurables, you're a follower of Jesus, but God looks at your heart. God knows. Yeah. And that's the point. When you look at anyone, if they may be slightly theologically different than you, be really careful writing them off and saying, clearly not a Christian. Because we can very easily start to begin to major on the minors and make separations, and that's how we end up with 60,000 denominations, And I was thinking about this is like we're talking about. Well, we were reading a book, and I was right before we were getting ready for this, and it was talking about Jesus' public ministry, and it was like we're not just known when he set up the kingdom, it's not known just off of belief. It's by how they behave, how they treat others, how they talk about others, how they live their lives, and according to the scriptures that were taught to them. And so much of as we're working through this is like the fruits of the Spirit, in people's lives. And so like we can look at some of these outward things, like clearly, like there's might be a disconnect of but like when it comes down to it, like I can look at you, I can see these fruits in your lives. But yeah, God does know your heart. And so, and I was listening to a podcast this week, it was talking about like the fruits of the Spirit sometimes are a disguise for pride in your life. That what are the root of why you're doing these things? Why are you what are you getting at? And so it's like, there could be a lot of deception, found within, within just be really careful speaking with such certainty about people's eternal destination when we really don't know. We have some externals to go off of, but we don't know people's hearts. And just kind of leave you with one thing, one kind of question at the end of this segment is, what if early on in the life of MLK, he questioned Christianity because of what he saw Christians doing at the time? And think of that time frame. I know it's hard for us to really visual 40s, 50s, even into the 60s, because some of us weren't there. But what if early on in MLK's life, he questioned some of his beliefs because of what he saw Christians doing at the time. And then think about people today. As they look at the religious landscape in America today, are they questioning their faith because of how we are acting? Just something to consider and something I'll leave you with there. We are going to go to a quick break, and then we'll be right back. We'll talk about, I hope you stick around, because we're going to talk about some really important follow-up to the talk on Sunday about influence in the way of Jesus. We'll be right back. And we're back on the New Story podcast with this Equip episode. I hope you're, I don't know what time you're drinking this. It is, or drinking this.
We are
I promise
coffee
that was just coffee that I poured. I just want to be really clear about that. It is 4:30 in the afternoon. And I was going to say, go grab a cup of coffee and drink it up while you listen. I hope you do. But lo and behold, I mess up my words. Now,
it happens to all of us.
Yeah, it does happen to all of us. Now, this series we're going through right now, or just finished up this last week. Pierce, you taught the first 3 weeks of it. I taught the last week. Give me the quick synopsis. You don't have to go into every week. What was the overall thing? Why were we doing this series? Why is it called The Way of Jesus?
Yeah, because it's the way of Jesus, because we asked the question, how did he make more and better followers of Jesus? And how are we then in turn making more and better followers of Jesus? How are we making more disciples? Mm-hmm. And that's really at the heart and at the root of what we wanted to accomplish in this series, is to be able to show, like, hey, we looked at the life of Jesus. Yeah. We took our discipleship process that we came up with as connect, imitate, and influence, and we rooted it in Acts chapter 2. And you see this, like the breaking of bread and what they devoted themselves to.
The early church,
what they devoted themselves to. But we simply didn't want to just go off of them. Yeah. We wanted to, they modeled their life, their church, how they interacted with one another off of the life and teachings of Jesus. Yeah. And so that's what we wanted to go to. So that's how we went through the different stories, this discipleship process, and why we wanted to go through this. And we looked at actual instances in the Bible where Jesus is seen as connecting with somebody. And it was Zacchaeus in the first one. Yeah. And then we looked at imitate and how Jesus modeled for us in the washing of the feet to humbly serve one another. And he even says that, I think in verse 15, it says, like, I have done this so that as an example for you. Yeah. So meaning what?
Imitate me.
Yeah. Do it, And then this last week is where you took over, and it was the way of Jesus and the idea of how we use our influence, which is also what we just talked about before this. Yeah.
And we looked at the woman at the well, Samaritan woman at the well, in John 4. I encourage you to go listen to that message. We'll link to it. Just catch back up. Actually, I'll link to all of them, so you can catch back up if you'd like, but on our website. But yeah, we just asked, okay, how, we asked that famous question, what would Jesus do if he was going to make more and better followers of Jesus? What would Jesus do? Well, we don't have to guess too much. What did Jesus do? What was the way of Jesus? And so that's what we went to the Bible to find out. We took 3 stories and walked through that. So the last week, this last week, influence, we believe we grow when we influence others toward Jesus. And so we've said throughout this whole series, and Pierce did a great job walking us through it, and with kind of this recurring theme of we want to live in the way of Jesus, with the heart of Jesus. And in John 4, with his interaction with the woman at the well, we see the heart of Jesus, and that it was personal. He was intentional with that. It said he had to go through Samaria. No, he didn't. Jews went around Samaria all the time because they didn't want to see him, smell him, nothing. They didn't want to be anywhere close to him. He did not have to go through there, but it said he did for her. He was intentional, and he was deeply personal with her, and he was also safe. And this is a great illustration for us and how we influence other people, is we are personal, we are intentional, and we are safe. Now, the beauty of this passage, if you were to go back and read John 4, It isn't just that Jews and Samaritans, after hundreds and hundreds of years of racial animosity, religious animosity, hating one another, not want to be around each other, that finally at the end of this passage, Jesus and the disciples are asked back into the city, and for 2 days they sat around and sang Kumbaya, and we have diversity for diversity's sake, and it's beautiful. That's not necessarily the ultimate beauty of this passage. Yes, that's great. But the beauty of this passage is that it shows us the power of the gospel to cross lines and make enemies now family. That's the beautiful part of this gospel, of the gospel and the story, and why we're going through it. Because the reality is, and you know this too, Pierce, and I mean all of us do, that it's very easy to just see our enemies as enemies, keep them at arm's length. I mean, like then, it was a culture of avoidance, and unfortunately, we are a culture of avoidance as well. When it comes to, we saw this a lot through 2020, 2021, as kind of racial tensions really ramped up in 2020. We had some people, a lot of people that was just kind of leaned into this culture of avoidance. Like, I don't see color. I don't want. Why do we have to keep talking about this? Why don't we just talk about the gospel? All these different things, right? It's very easy to settle into this culture of avoidance, but the gospel chooses to cross the lines and turn enemies into family. And the reason we don't do that is the reason we don't necessarily cross lines is very similar to what we talked about in the first segment here, is we just make quick judgment calls on people based on either, in this situation, externals, and in a lot of other situations, it's character traits that we see, or the way they voted, or what they're wearing, or what color their hair is, or what flag they're hanging from their door. It doesn't, all that different stuff. We make snap judgments about people. But Brian Loritz is an author and speaker. I just got a recent book from him. I'm looking forward to reading his latest that I think he put out last year. But He said this, and I thought it was very poignant. He said, "Be very careful articulating opinions about folk who's never been to your dinner table."
And it's because
That's good.
Think about this, for example. When you have a holiday meal and you walk into it, do you feel anxious? I mean, okay, let's say there's no like drama or whatever. You feel comfortable in the home with your family.
Yeah, we're
welcome.
thinking ideal situation.
Ideal situation, not like not a terrible situation, but
we all have chaos.
Just like ideal, like hey, you feel okay coming home to have a meal with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you ever like? I remember maybe you're like this, but I remember like the first time I went to Alex's family's like holidays, and like as the significant other,
mm-hmm.
and like it is not. Like you walk in, you're like, I don't know anybody. Like I just like this girl, and like I'm
just gonna stay with her.
And it's super uncomfortable, and because you're getting invited to something that's super personal. It's like they have family traditions, they have all these different things, and so like, and the reality for this John 4 passage is like you have this woman at the well, who's a Samaritan, but also probably because the disciples are flawed just like we are. Probably made the same like quick judgment on her. Yeah. And it's this reality, but they had never been close to in proximity to her at all at this point. And
Jesus sent him into the town, and he's like, "Hey, go intermingle with some Samaritans and get us some food." Like that. I think we just kind of breeze past that. He's like, "Yeah, he sent him in for some food." I'm like, These guys probably hadn't had a lot of interactions with
they probably
Samaritans
never
at all.
Set foot in that town.
Yeah,
like zero.
They all avoided it. Yeah, but they're following Jesus, and where did it take them? It took them into quote unquote enemy territory, a place they didn't want to go. But I think Brian Loritz's quote is very poignant. I talked about this. I think illustrated it was last year. I don't remember in a message where we can kind of build a fence of a fence, if you will, and we build a fence in front of us, and it separates us from other people, and we're not able to see them, build all these boards, but instead we should take those things and lay them down and create a longer table rather than a taller fence. Be very careful articulating opinions about folk who's never been to your dinner table. And if everyone who's ever sat at your table looks like you, sounds like you, thinks like you, I think it may be time. It may be time to branch out a little bit, because the gospel is much bigger And if we're going to see the gospel reach all people and all nations, we can't just favor those that look and sound like us. So I thought that was just a really neat quote I wanted to bring up, and the reason why we don't do certain things is because of that. I saw you write something down. Is there something you wanted to share?
No, I was just thinking about the dinner table. I had preached a sermon one time on the tax collector Levi, and it just goes into like the vein of using your influence, and Jesus invites Levi and all these tax collectors to a banquet.
Yeah,
he sits with sinners, and then he gets mocked for that. He's like, wait a minute, he sits with sinners and tax collectors. Why is he doing this? And then you see Levi follow Jesus after that point, like becomes a disciple and gives his life. And then the next verse you see, I don't remember the actual verse where it is, but he goes and he grabs all of his tax collector friends and invites them to a banquet. So he opens up his home, opens up his table to them, and Jesus modeled for him using his influence, his circle of friends, his tax collectors. And he said, I invited you to a meal. Go invite other people to a meal.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he does that. And they share the gospel with that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life to these tax collectors who then give their life to the Lord, maybe, you know, like it's just, so that's why I just wrote Levi and circled it. So as we came, because he talked about a dinner table, just cannot talk about it.
Now there's an aspect of this passage that some people, just generally, it can be a little bit confusing, because actually let me pull up John 4 while we're here, while we're talking about it. Give me a second.
We'll edit this out in post.
What's that? We won't edit this out in post. It's gonna stay in there because it's it just takes a moment. Okay. In John 4, when Jesus is talking with this woman, they get into this discussion, and she's like, "Hey, explain to me this living water that you're talking about because you think it's so important." And he says, "Okay, go get your husband and bring him back, and I'll talk with both of you, and that way, 2 birds, 1 stone." And she says in verse 17, "I have no husband," she replied. And Jesus said to her, "You're right to say you have no husband. Fact is, you've had 5, and the man you now have is not your husband." Basically, you're living with a man, committing adultery with a man outside of God's boundaries, and says, what you have just said is quite true. And so she kind of deflects and goes, "Hey, you're a prophet." And then they go into this other discussion, because she just doesn't really want to talk about that, because what Jesus just said is it just exposed her fully, wide open. And for him to know that could get her killed. And that's a scary place to be. It's not only, it's threatening that he would know that about her, because it probably is not super public knowledge that this is what's happening. But people did know that she was multi times divorced. Now, what is confusing about that is, why did Jesus do that? Is that really the best bridge building technique, Jesus? To just be like, "Hey, go get your husband. Gotcha. I knew you didn't have one." Like, does that feels weird. I mean, obviously he didn't say it like that, but
like, it wouldn't have worked for me. Like, it wouldn't work for me.
Yeah.
And then, like, if someone said that to me, it definitely would not have worked for me either.
Yeah. So Jesus is kind of truth telling here, as we call it, with this woman, and exposing the truth. And what this has turned into is a lot of people use this as a reason to now, like, the most loving thing I can do with other people is now go and just tell them the truth. No matter the relational fallout, I'm going to follow Jesus' example and just tell the truth.
And it's almost like we've rebranded slander as truth telling.
Exactly. We have. We talked about it just a couple weeks ago on here of sitting in the seat of scoffers. These are the people scoffers are the people we lift up, the people we celebrate, and the people we become. We think we're telling the truth, but we're just slandering. And most of the time, we would just rather be right than be relational with people. We would rather win the argument than win the person. And so we are now beginning to take our own sinful tendencies with telling the truth and now apply them to Jesus and be like, this is exactly how Jesus would do it. When really, we're just being offensive and we're being jerks. See, that's our truth telling most of the time. I'm not going to say every time, because there are times when we can very carefully and compassionately Be honest and tell the truth. And there are times that is very much needed. But his truth-telling is a whole different experience. He exposed her to save her. She realized in that moment when she was fully seen, she was fully known. That's in a very threatening way in a lot of ways. Like, hey, I know this about you. She's fully known. She's like, I got no secrets. He told me everything I ever did. But he also showed her that she was fully loved. And that is the aspect that we miss oftentimes in our truth-telling. When we're out and we're pointing at people and then at the end of our we're like, we got people at the end of our pointing fingers and we're just like, Pierce, I'm just going to tell you the truth and you're just going to, this is the most loving thing I can do. We're missing that we're Jesus fully knew her, but he showed her that she was loved. He showed her that she was safe. Like that's, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, like, unless you have a relationship with someone or have been given clear permission to speak into someone's life.
Yeah.
Like the reality is leave the conviction of sin to the Spirit to work in that person's life.
Yeah.
To Jesus.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I just thought about this is like for the reality is like you have permission to speak into my life if you see sin. Vice versa. The pastoral advisory team, same thing.
Yeah.
Like anybody, because we are in the position as pastors, so anybody can speak if they see something in us. Like we want that.
Yeah.
Like we want that. But not everybody's going to want that. Nor do you have enough relationships with everybody in order to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, a general rule that I brought up several times now because it's so stinking important is, and I want this you all and myself to remember this. I want you to remember this, Pierce. I want us all to remember this: that your intimacy determines your intensity. The type of how intimate your relationship is with someone determines the intensity of the conversation you can have with them. Most of the time, when these things go awry, it's because we've gone in super intense and we don't have an intimate relationship with people. And we haven't been given permission. We don't have relational equity, we talked about, with people to draw from. We're just going in and just and throwing stuff out there. But Jesus, in this situation in John 4, he chose to have a conversation because if you listen to the message from Sunday, we called influence. We looked at Daryl Davis at the beginning, who helped turn over 200 KKK members turn in their robes and turn away from their white supremacy pathway that they were on, to turn from that. It's an insane story. Jesus chose to have a conversation because just like Daryl did, Jesus knew that our greatest opportunity for influence comes from a relationship. Like people just can't speak into my life just randomly because, you know, I don't know them and they can just come up and start throwing stuff. No. Something my youth pastor told me, I don't know if you've heard this before, Pierce, something my youth pastor told me when I was in high school. And he was speaking in reference to him, in my relationship with him. He said, you gain trust by the spoonful, but you lose it by the bucketful. And that's been a really true thing in my life. Trust is gained slowly. You don't just, I think we gain trust slowly in general. There's certain roles that people have that make that a little bit easier. Roles of authority that make that a little bit easier. You can gain it a little bit quicker. Maybe it's a small bucket, and but you gain trust, you gain influence. Same is true with influence. You gain influence by the spoonful, and you will lose that sucker so quick. You'll dump that bucket right over through pushing too far, trying to have too intensive a conversation when you have no intimate relationship with them. And this really matters when it comes to our influence. What I'd say is that if we were truly, like Christians, hear me out, if we were truly, truly concerned about the gospel reaching the people around us, we would not be so quick to sacrifice that on altars of all kinds of things. We would not be, if we truly cared about the gospel reaching our neighbor, we would not so quickly sacrifice that on the altar of politics, on the altar of personal preferences with what they do with their house and their yard and their fence. We our coworkers, we would not be so quick to sacrifice our influence if we truly were concerned. And so what it kind of shows us when we are just like dumping buckets of influence all over the place on the altar of our politics, it shows that maybe we don't care as much as we think we do about the gospel reaching people. And that's something we have to square with. And that's that's I'll just leave that there. I'll let that set.
Yeah, so then with that, it's like the question we have to ask is like, well, so how can I use my influence? Like, how can, if I have this, and this question we should be asking is like, Lord, you have given us influence. How today then can I affect change for your glory?
Yeah.
How can I witness? I don't want to sacrifice my witness so that way I can reach those. I don't want to do that. So like, I want to follow you. I want to be faithful to you. I want people to hear about the hope they can have for New Story in Jesus. Like, what are some ways that we can do that?
Yeah. Because Sunday was all about just showing us like, hey, this is necessary. We have to have some sort of relationship to have influence. So now, okay, let's say we do. Yeah. How do I actually use it?
Yeah, and we just came out of James, and one of the things I think is helpful is for us is like, how can we use our influences? And here's what we said: care for and defend the marginalized. Yeah,
if you want to gain, and this isn't just to you don't do this just to gain like brownie points to be able to share, right. Talk with someone. We do this because it's the call, and justice is a call on the life of the believer. Like it's not to be questioned. Like it's a call on the life of the believer. And so we do this for that reason. But in that, as we care for and defend the marginalized, we'll gain influence with the people around us. Because that's when people think of the church, they think of that. And we can show people that, hey, we are a church that actually cares about life from womb to tomb. We're not just pro-life and we're out here, shouting about abortions. We're pro-life from womb to tomb. Everything matters to us all the way down.
Yeah, because like we're meeting needs because that's required of us. Like we want to meet needs. We want to be the hands and feet of Jesus anywhere we go. Yeah. And so we're positioned where we are on purpose. And so like the reality for us is like a practical way people can see the outworking of our faith is how we care for people, how we treat people, how we talk about people, how we talk about certain groups of people. And it's like quickly we come to defend the marginalized. And I, just for James, and here's just in talk with all this, that we quickly sacrifice, our influence on altar politics. James 1:27 says this: religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And then the second phrase here, to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. We very quickly sacrifice that influence because we're being polluted by the world. And this call to be in the way of Jesus with the heart of Jesus calls us to recognize that in ourselves. Like we do this all the time.
Yeah.
And so part of us, that's for us to think in the mindset, we have to be thinking, how am I using my influence? How are my actions affecting my influence? And it all comes down to, one of the things we say a lot of times is to be intentional and personal with those around you. And I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting, this John 4 passage that is like, we're like getting close to finishing up. This is interesting. In chapter 4, it says, he talks to the disciples. The disciples said to one another, could someone have brought him something to eat? And like, he was trying to figure out like, wait a minute, how'd you get food? But he says, Jesus tells him, listen to what I'm telling you. Open your eyes and look at the fields because they are ready for harvest. And so for us, we pray for more to come. We want to use our influence. Why? Because we want to share the love of Jesus to people. And if we look around us, to our communities, to our families, to our spouses, to our kids, the fields are ready. We're positioned to affect change for God's glory, to be able to share the gospel with people. And we don't want anything to get in the way of that. We don't want to cause some kind of hurdle. We don't want to cause a barrier. We don't want to cause like a gut reaction or aversion to the Christianity, to the hope that we have, because we know the gospel is truth. We know the gospel is love. We know the gospel is peace. And so for us, we don't want to do anything to take away from our influence. And that's why we say this 100 times. We want to keep saying this, is we don't want to affect our witness and our influence for the purpose of showing Christ's love to people.
Yeah. You mentioned the passage at the end of John 4, the verses there where he talks about the field. It says the field is ripe for harvest, but something we have to square with is the fields just don't accidentally get harvested.
Oh, yeah.
You have to be intentional to go out there and do it. And at that point in time, they didn't have combines. You handpicked that stuff. And you can see just a little bit more personal and intentional reality to that. Handpicked, one by one. One by one, I'm going to each field or each grain of wheat. It's very personal and very intentional. We have to do that.
And what's one really applicable way they can do that in the next couple of weeks?
Next couple of weeks is pretty simple. There is the Super Bowl of Christianity coming up in just a couple weeks. I think you've heard of it. It's called Easter. And for people, whether they've been a part of the church or not, it is a time when it's most easy for people to come visit and come just check out what a church is doing. And they'll go to a service somewhere, whether they go with their parents or a personal invite. And what I would encourage you to do is use the influence you have around you and the people's lives around you to invite them to Easter. Now, with that, and I want you to think, who could I invite to come sit with me? Maybe just one person, two people. Who could I invite to come sit with me in a service at New Story, for example, on Easter Sunday? And maybe as you're sitting and thinking about that, nobody comes to mind. That should also be a realization for you. That maybe you're not using your influence at all. Maybe you're not being intentional. Maybe you're not being personal. And that's where you need to start. You need to build some relational equity with some people around you and show them that they matter. Show them that they care, that you care. And they're not just a project. You care about them whether they get saved or not. And you want to see them follow Jesus. You don't need to shy away from that. But most people, if they know they're a project, they'll be like, no, thank you. And so maybe you're sitting here right now, and you're saying, man, I don't know who I would invite.
Pray for it.
I think you pray for it, and you don't just sit on your hands. It's going to take some work, man. And maybe you don't invite someone this year because of that, because you don't want to just jump in and say, hey, come church with me. I know we don't know each other. We don't have a relationship. Your intimacy determines your intensity. Okay. And if that's you, if you don't invite anyone to Easter, even if you don't have someone who comes, you can still use your influence in this house to make people feel welcome here. Because you're going to probably, if you're part of New Story and you come Sunday, come prepared to see new people and go up and talk to them. Don't just stick to your own. Get ready to go up and talk to them.
Yeah, to be warm, welcoming. That's one of the things we said, to live in the way of Jesus with the heart of Jesus. Is so much of that is for us. What we want to be different here. We want to be warm and welcoming to anybody who walks through here, and they want to feel that. And I want to tell you a story. Someone was telling us that they're just conversation.
Yeah, this is a beautiful thing.
This is this conversation that they had, and they're telling us that we've grown up in church, and we just kind of know that when you go into a new church, that like people are going to talk to you, that people are going to greet you, and just going to be like pleasantries. And but this person said by the end of their time here, that they felt
just one Sunday visit.
Just one Sunday, they felt like people knew them, and they knew people. And so that's just a plug for our church right now. And thank you, church, for being that for somebody.
Yeah.
And so just realize that, like, if you don't have someone to bring with you to Easter, we hope you do invite somebody.
Yeah.
But you be that for someone you see who's new. Connect with someone. Seek out somebody. Pray for somebody for next year. Pray for somebody for next month, whatever it may be. Pray and invite somebody, and then also invest in people's lives. Because ultimately, someone did that for you. Someone shared the gospel with you. Someone loved you. Someone cared enough to invite you. be that for someone else.
Yeah. And church, this is the call on us. And church, I think you are very, very good at this. And I'm proud of you for the things that I see, like this story that we just heard. It's a beautiful thing. And so we want to see that continue here at New Story. But for now, that is where we're going to end today. I appreciate you sticking around. Make sure to check out all the links below. We have a link to John MacArthur's quote, or that interaction if you want to see that. We have a Together for the Gospel on MLK 50, kind of a panel discussion about his theology. It was fantastic, very enlightening. We have an article from Justin Giboney in Christianity Today discussing this very thing. That was also beautiful. We'll have links to sermons. We'll have all kinds of different stuff. So please go check that out. But for now, we love you. And we thank you for joining us. This has been the Equip Podcast, equipping you to live out your Christian life as you faithfully love God and love others with truth and grace. Now let's go do it.